archaeological research, architectural research, and historical or documentary research. And here at the Wheeler House, the committee has performed all three of these researches. So as a result, they have as an authentic restoration as possible to achieve from these sources. In furnishing the house, of course, there would have been a number of sources from which the furnishings could have come. There would have been furniture inherited by John Wheeler from his forebears. There would have been furniture that he and his wives could have purchased from urban areas such as Norfolk, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. And there could have been furniture that his three wives brought into the family from their family, as well as locally made furniture, and what we call utilitarian furniture, usually made on plantations by slaves for use in the kitchen. We have examples of all three of these, three or four types of these sources here in the Wheeler House. Also to be taken in consideration is the lifestyle of the family in whose house you are trying to recreate the interior. In this regard, I would like to read you something to give you some idea of the background of this family. The documentary evidence on the family indicates that while its members were comfortable and lived well, the accumulation of great wealth and display of ostentatiousness were of little concern to them. Rather, the family had a more bookish inclination with investigative minds in the fields of medicine, science, and history. John Wheeler had worked with his cousin in the publishing business in New York before coming to North Carolina. Though in Murfreesboro he had described, quote, a successful merchant and ship owner, unquote, he is also described as a patron of literature and an occasional author of pieces and treasurer of the Hertford Academy. At his death, he owned a large parcel of books. His father had been a physician, is said to have left at his death works in manuscript on medical science, which evidenced the depth of his acquaintance and devotion to his profession. The next generation of the Wheeler family was even more involved in the pursuit of education, the law, literature, and history. John Hill Wheeler, the most prominent member of the family, a graduate of Columbia College in Washington, D.C., read law under Chief Justice John L. Taylor of North Carolina, and took a M.A. degree at the University of North Carolina. He was superintendent of the Charlotte Mint, treasurer of North Carolina, member of the legislature of North Carolina, and minister to Nicaragua, and employed as at the Statistical Bureau in Washington, D.C. He was the author of several books, including his best-known Historical Sketches of North Carolina, published in 1851. His brother, Dr. Samuel Jordan Wheeler, who incidentally purchased the house at his father's death in 1833 and lived here until 1867. He continued to live here and was educated at Columbia College. A physician like his grandfather, he was a writer and antiquarian. He founded and edited the Murfreesboro Citizen in 1858 and assisted his brother in the preparation of his historical sketches. He also kept a diary for many years, which is a primary source depicting life at the Wheeler House during his residency. He also had a daughter, Catherine Pugh Wheeler, who wrote. Junius Brutus Wheeler, half-brother to Samuel and John Hill, was a West Point graduate, later a professor there, and the author of several textbooks adopted by the War Department. A frequent visitor to the Wheeler house would have been a nephew, John Wheeler Moore, also a historian, and the author of a 2-volume history of North Carolina, and a child's history of North Carolina, which was adopted by the state school system. All of these bookish interests would be reflected in the furnishings and the memorabilia in the house. It is this interest in the Wheelers for 4 generations that makes it a distinctive and unique family. The scholarly and inquisitive minds of the various members of the family should be well illustrated in the furnishings of the house, as this is perhaps the most prominent characteristic of the family. As historian Tom Paramore said, quote, "For over a half a century, the Wheeler House in Murfreesboro was a mecca for political, religious, and literary figures from throughout eastern North Carolina," unquote. Evidence of the large size of the Wheeler family has been also reflected in the furnishings. Of John Wheeler's 19 children, 12 were living when he moved into the house in 18 and 15, though not all, several of those 12 were married and were not living here. And 11 were living when he died in 1832. His son, Dr. Samuel Jordan Wheeler, had 5 children who were reared here. Besides these, there had been a constant influx of visiting relatives, and in the 1850s, a few students at the Chowan College boarded here. So this gives you the background of the family, and also helps you conceive of how the type of furnishings such a family would have. As to the historical documentation required for proper restoration, this Wheeler House restoration is very fortunate in that it has not only the will of John Wheeler, but also an inventory of his personal effects made shortly after his death in 1832. And this was the primary historical source that we had for furnishing the house, as it was when he died. I might add that we also have, to show the second generation occupancy of the house, have introduced some things later than 1832 to show how it might have continued to have looked with these few additions put in by his son, Dr. Samuel Jordan Wheeler, who lived here until 1867. But as far as the inventory of John Wheeler of 1832, it was quite easy to determine the rooms in which the various pieces of furniture sat. Because you could tell this by the nature of the particular pieces, though there was not a breakdown from room to room, but a continuous running list of the furnishings. But it indicates that the inventory, which was taken by the son of John Wheeler, John Hill Wheeler, and Mr. Worrell, started in what was the parlor, with a set of a dozen chairs, a sofa, and items that you would identify as being in the parlor. They next came into what we now call a hall, but was listed as a passage. And in fact, we know that the one piece in the passage is designated as being there, so that does pinpoint the passage. The next place they went was to the dining room, which where you find sideboard, dining table, and dining chairs. From there they came back into the main part of the house and went into the west room, which is the bed sitting room. There you listed beds and cots and things, also rocking chairs, so indicating that they did sit in there as well as using as sleeping quarters. From there they went upstairs and listed the furnishings in the larger of the two of the bedrooms up there, which is directly over the west downstairs bedroom. Here you found two large beds and other furnishings indicating a bedroom. And also from there they went to across the hall to the east bedroom, where you found other beds listed. They listed things in the small room at the back of the hall, such as a loom and spinning gear, and then the hall, then came down the stairs, listing the carpet and the rods on the steps, and went into the kitchen. So this is the route of the two men who made the inventory, and so this gave us very concrete evidence as to what pieces were in which rooms. There's very little furnishings listed in the passage, from which the front door opens into, but there is listed a lamp, and this lamp has further been described as a glass lamp. It's a glass hanging lamp, what they call a bell lamp. It has at the top of it a smoke disc at the top, and the candles burns to keep the smoke from damaging the ceiling. This is a typical hall lighting piece for the Federal period and was made about. Also in the passage or hallway was a settee, and this is again one of the period in the classical form, which was so typical of the Federal period decorations with the introduction of the scrolls. The passages were frequently used in warm weather as a second sitting room, and frequently you found settees and chairs lining the walls, particularly in the summertime when they could get it through a breeze through the passage, the through passage with the doors open at the front and back. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
We are in the parlor, and in this room, the first item on the inventory was perhaps the most expensive item in the room, and that was a large Brussels carpet. This carpet covers the entire floor, and it was a status symbol for the more well-to-do to have a Brussels-type carpet, because they were very, very expensive and frequently were imported. Also in the room is a sofa, which the inventory says was covered in horsehair, as well as 12 chairs also covered in horsehair. These would all have been, the pattern for this horsehair on the sofa and the chairs would have all been of matching color and design. Let's see, can we stop it from there? Here in the parlor, singular, we find a three-piece banquet table. This is rather unusual in the normal furnishings of a parlor, but not without other instances, because there are known where other houses in this area put these banquet tables in the parlor. This one we are looking at is the one of two demi-lune ends to a three-piece banquet table. It's made out of mahogany and was in all probability brought in from one of the urban northern areas. On the table is one of a pair of hurricane shades which are called for in the inventory. Here in the fireplace in the parlor is furnished with a pair of andirons and a fender as indicated in the inventory, and also over the fireplace is a oval mantel mirror indicated by the inventory. It is felt that this room definitely was the parlor because it is only, this one is the only of the two rooms on the first floor of the main part of the house that has a fireplace that you could install andirons and an oval mantel mirror. It is thought, however, that the fireplace itself has been made smaller, has been altered in later years, as it is only, the depth of it is only 14 inches, and was probably later a stove was used here rather than the open fireplace. Folding table. This was interpreted to mean a folding top tea table, which was typical of this period. This is a mahogany one, either of American or English origin, and were usually found in the parlor. The existing tea table from the Wheeler family now has been observed, and this table is very similar to the one that was in the John Wheeler inventory. Here are 4 of the set of 12 chairs which are scattered about the rooms. When the rooms were not in use, these chairs were always placed around the perimeter of the room and only brought out when in use. Center of the 3-piece banquet table, it is of course, a drop leaf table with, and singular, it is a 6-legged table with the 2 legs on each end that would swing out, leaving support in the center of the center section. And all the inventories have to be looked at with suspicion because they do not always tell the true story. For instance, the piano that we are seeing here in the classical style was not listed in the inventory, but was listed in the will of John Wheeler, and it was left to his daughter Julia Wheeler. This actually was not the one that Julia received, but is typical of what the one that she would. Above the piano is a portrait of Richard Johnson, painted by Edward McGibbon, who was an itinerant painter who worked in Baltimore, Norfolk, and eastern North Carolina in the first quarter of the 19th century. Richard Johnson was a nephew of John Wheeler, being the son of John Wheeler's sister, Martha Wheeler, who had first married a Mr. Johnston. Okay. According to the inventory, there were 2 large engravings in this parlor. We are showing one of them here. These were typical wall decorations for this period, which was influenced much by the classical style. This is an engraving after Lorraine, the French artist, and it depicts a classical temple on the left-hand side and a very pleasant landscape, a typical type of landscape that were found in homes such as John Wheeler's. The west room of the main part of the house on the first floor, which has been designated as the sitting room. In this room was a large, according to the inventory, was a large maple bed, listed as bedstead, furniture, and bed. The bedstead being the frame, the furnishings would be the textile hangings, and the bed itself actually being the mattress. This was the room that was used by John Wheeler and his third wife. Okay. I think I'll show one of these curtains, because these are on the inventory.
Okay. Pull that the blind back there. I guess the sun will be.
Listed in the inventory is one work table. This was a terminology for a small table that today we call a sewing table. It was the latest table equipped with drawers in which you could keep her sewing equipment. The bottom drawer was frequently furnished with a bag at the bottom, which she could put her unfinished work in. And this one is so equipped with a wooden compartment below the bottom drawer, which would have been covered in a fabric. Also in the room is washstand, which is called for in the inventory. This one also includes a basin and a pitcher. Below on the shelf is a chinkle pot, a necessity of the day. Also in the room, to fulfill the inventory requirement, is a rocking chair. This would indicate that the room was used as also as a sitting room. It is a mahogany rocking chair as called for in the inventory, and has a ham mattress to it, which is actually means the seat of the chair and the fabric that's used on the chair. Next to it is a day bed or cot. It's listed as a cot in the inventory. Perhaps several people slept in this room besides the Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler, or in case there was illness in the family, that would also be sleeping place for people to sleep who attended to the sick. Above the cot was one of the four windows, which is draped with a dimity curtain. This was called for in the inventory. This was typical decorations for bedrooms of this period in the white dimity. And here they're done, as you can see, in the graceful folds in the classical period. To the foot of the cot in a small chair is a medicine case, indicating that it would have been the type of medicine case that perhaps Dr. Samuel Jordan Wheeler used while he lived here in the house. This room also called for a stove, and since there was never a fireplace in this room, according to the architectural research that was done by the State Archives and History, it was furnished with a chimney and a stove. The stove would represent the type that was being used during the second generation's occupancy of the house. Stoves, of course, had been in use from the late 18th century here in America, and they were frequently called, these at least in the bedrooms, are called 4 o'clock stoves, because around 4 o'clock in the afternoon they would have been lighted and to take the chill off the room for the coming night. Here is illustrated what is remnants of the original wallpaper in this room, which was applied directly to the pine boarding which constituted the walls. The committee very carefully had this analyzed and reproduced by Brunschwig Fils to put the reproduction paper back in the room, which you see in this view of the reproduction paper here. According to the research, this paper was made in the late 20s and the early 30s and would have been appropriate for the house. Over the door is a sporting rifle which was owned by John Wheeler's son, John Hill Wheeler, made in Philadelphia. We are now in the dining room of the Wheeler house, which is actually in a separate building attached to the main house, joined to the house by a porch. In this room, the inventory calls for a small dining table, which is shown here. This is a walnut drop leaf dining table in the classical period, or what we would call a Hepplewhite, with square tapering legs. This was probably used with the larger table when there were a large number of people here as guests. On the table are 5 candlesticks clustered together to indicate what was called for in the inventory. At this period, candlesticks were not particularly used as decorative ornaments. They were purely utilitarian. They were cleaned at night and put in one central place where people for the next evening could come and get them and take them to whatever part of the house that they needed to be in. In the inventory, called for 5 candlesticks and 1 lamp. This could have been all the lighting that the first generation of the Wheelers had. Also on the table is a blue and white Canton pitcher, which was typical of the chinaware that was used at this period. This was imported into the States from China after the Revolution, when we traded directly with China rather than having to go through the mother country of England. Another original item from the house is believed to be the hurricane shade, which is over one of the 5 candlesticks. This has come down into the family and has now been returned to the house. Above the table is a portrait, another one by Edward McGibbon. This one of James Hunter Southall, who was the son of the Reverend Daniel Southall. Southalls came to Murfreesboro from Virginia, and his father was a very prominent citizen of Murfreesboro, as well as the next generations of the South Halls. This gentleman married a daughter of John Wheeler, Sarah Clifton Wheeler. At the fireplace in this room is a brass fender, which was a family piece that has been returned to the house. And above the mantel is another family portrait, this one of Martha Wheeler, who was his sister to John Wheeler, and the mother of Richard Wheeler, whose portrait hangs in the parlor. According to the inventory in the dining room was one Beaufat. A Beaufat in the 18th century was frequently a built-in closet in any room that was used for the storage of dishes and food. But in this case, it's interpreted as being what we call a sideboard. This is a sideboard, again, in the classical period, with the center being a swelled front. On the sideboard, in the center, there's a silver-plated cake basket, again in the classical period. And this was an item also mentioned in the inventory. Above the sideboard is a picture of George Britton, who lived in the Philadelphia area and was a connection of the family. To the right of the fireplace is a built-in cupboard, which was known in the late 18th century as a Beaufat. They have recent research that the families in Columbia, Williamsburg, they discovered to the left of the fireplace in that dining room was a built-in Beaufat, and they have so reconstructed it. But here in the Wheeler house dining room, you have one that is original to the house, and obviously it was for the storage of china and items used in the dining room. Also in the dining room is a mahogany chest with the top drawer fitted as a writing compartment. These later, in the early part of the 20th century, became known as butler's desks. They were perhaps frequently used in dining rooms where house accounts could be kept by the lady of the house. This view shows the chest with the upper drawer pulled out, showing the writing compartment, which is furnished with pigeonholes and small drawers, indicating that it was used as a desk. Frequently, desks of this type were found in dining rooms and are so listed in other inventories. The chest is a tea set that belonged to John Wheeler's daughter, Julia Wheeler, who married Dr. Godwin Cotton Moore of Mulberry Grove. This is another example of the family pieces that were owned by the Wheelers and their descendants. Above the chest is a federal mirror done in an architectural style. These were very popular during the federal period, and frequently the upper part of the mirrors were painted with a scenic decoration. In a corner of the dining room is a pine table. It may seem strange to see this in the dining room with the wash tub, but frequently at this period the fine china that people own was never taken to the kitchen, but was washed by the servants in the dining room to prevent breakage going back and forth, and then put back in the cupboards. And this is the reason you find a rather crude table and with the other fine pieces. In Wheeler's dining room, he lists one pine table and 2 wash basins. So this would have been used for washing the fine china rather than taking it to the kitchen. This is the large dining room table that we find here, which is called for in the inventory. It too is a mahogany drop leaf table, again in the classical style of what was also known as the Hepplewhite style. It sits on a floor cloth, which was typical of this period. These were painted canvases, and we used frequently underneath dining room tables to prevent crumbs from spilling on the floor. Thomas Jefferson had a floor cloth under his dining room table in the White House, which was painted green. Around the table, 6 of a set of 12 chairs, Windsor chairs in this room. Wheeler's inventory called for a total of 24 Windsor chairs. The Windsor chair in this period was the favorite sitting chair, and it was its popularity has continued even into the present day. The Windsor chair first originated in England in the early part of the 18th century, but by the middle of the 18th century there were factories in Philadelphia and northern towns putting these chairs out. There were a few Windsor chair factories in the South. One was located in Richmond, but these chairs were probably imported from some northern town. On the table is part of the blue and white Canton set, which was so popular at this time. And also in the center is a silver-plated bread basket, which was later used for fruit. They started out as bread baskets, and this bread basket is lifted. We are now in the upstairs bedroom over the bedroom on the first floor bedroom on the west side of the house. This was obviously the girls' room in the family, and we have it as at the time of John Wheeler's death in 1832. This room perhaps was occupied by his daughter Julia Wheeler, who was then 18, and a daughter by his second wife, and by her 2 younger half-sisters, Sarah Clifton Wheeler, who was then 13, and her other half-sister, Henrietta Wheeler, who was 11. These 2 girls were children by his third wife, Sarah Clifton. The room calls for 2 beds, one being a mahogany bed, which you see here again in the classical style of about 18 and 15. The second bed in the room, according to the inventory, was a maple bed, and this is represented by this one, which is, of course, maple. These beds would have been where these young girls would have slept. This is one of 2 card tables that the inventory calls for to be in this bedroom. It could have been used as a dressing table for the young girls, while the other one could have been used perhaps as a desk. It seems strange that you find 2 card tables in the bedroom rather than in the parlor, but it may be that the Wheelers, when they became Baptists, the Baptist faith, and didn't approve of card playing, removed these to the 2nd floor to be used for other purposes. To the left of the table is a Windsor commode chair, and which was a type of indoor plumbing of the day. This room also called for a washstand and a wash bowl and pitcher, which is represented by this one. These the holes in the top of these washstands were very small at this period, and naturally the bowls and pitchers were very small. Not many of these have survived to the present day. This is the second of the 2 mahogany card tables which are called for this room. This one has been opened, and instead of playing cards on it, it has been used as a desk. On top of it is a lap desk, which were quite popular at this period, and here these young girls could have done their lessons. This is a carpet that is called for in the inventory. These carpets are listed in practically all the bedrooms. The carpets were made on a loom, and then which were approximately 3 feet in width or more, and then they were sewn together to create the carpet, but they were made as strips. In 1832, this bedroom on the east side of the house upstairs was occupied probably by Charles Wheeler, who was 9, Claiborne Clifton Wheeler, who was 7, and Avery Niles Wheeler, 5, and Junius Brutus Wheeler, who was 2. These were all children of John Wheeler by his 3rd wife, Sarah Clifton. The crib here was probably one similar that the child, Junius Brutus Wheeler, slept in, who at that time was 2. As you remember, he went to West Point and later became a professor. In this part of the room is a pencil post bed of the late 18th century, and could have been a piece of furniture that John Wheeler inherited, brought with him when he first started housekeeping. In front of it is a trundle bed, which was called for this room. And of course, as you know, the trundle beds fitted under the larger bed. They were usually on rollers, and in the daytime and not in use, would be concealed underneath the larger bed. Frequently, these small or low trundle beds were fitted with holes in the top of the 4 posts to insert a long stick, which supported a netting, type of mosquito netting in the summertime that would keep off the insects from the infant child. In the center of the room is a small candle stand which has inlaid on it a game of checkers, and here the boys could enjoy a game of checkers with the set that's in the box on top of the table. Also in the room is a slant top primitive desk, probably made locally, at which they could have studied, and with a slate and the books that they were used in the school. The map over the door, over the desk, is a map of the Atlantic coast states printed in the early 19th century, and in North Carolina it identifies the town of Murfreesboro. Here we see the four-post pencil post bed with the trundle bed completely hidden underneath the dust rubble of the bed. And this is where it would have been shown in the daytime. At the foot of the bed is a tin wash tub of the day in which the young boys could have bathed. And then next to the tub is a very rare, small, local Hertford County chest, usually either a utility chest or a toy chest for children. This is has a scalloped apron and bracket.
We are delighted to have John E. Tyler of Roxabelle, North Carolina, consultant to the Wheeler House project, take us on a guided tour of the Wheeler House. Mr. Tyler has been actively engaged in the preservation and restoration of numerous historic properties in North Carolina.